When I fired my business partner from the operations role she had helped create, I expected anger, accusations, maybe even a messy exit. What I did not expect was a letter from her attorney containing transcripts of private conversations between us. Conversations that had taken place in my office, after hours, with the door closed, while I believed I was speaking candidly to someone who still cared about the company we built. My name is Natalie, and this is the story of how my business partner secretly recorded months of our private meetings to build a legal case against me, only for those recordings to prove that the termination was legitimate all along. The quotes looked familiar enough to make my stomach drop. They were my words, or pieces of my words, arranged in a way that made me sound cold, biased, and calculating. The letter claimed I had used performance issues as a cover for wrongful termination. It implied that I had already decided to push Bennett out for personal and discriminatory reasons, and had only pretended to document business concerns afterward. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the packet spread in front of me, my coffee untouched, reading sentences that sounded like me and yet did not reflect what I had meant at all. Bennett and I founded the company together 6 years earlier in St. Paul, Minnesota. We ran a boutique logistics consulting firm that helped regional manufacturers clean up supply chains, renegotiate freight contracts, and build better inventory systems. It was not glamorous work, but it mattered to our clients, and we were good at it. I handled strategy, finance, and client growth. Bennett handled operations, staffing, and project delivery. In the beginning, we balanced each other. I was methodical, sometimes too cautious. Bennett was charming, fast-moving, and persuasive. He could walk into a room of skeptical plant managers and have them laughing in 10 minutes. For the first few years, that charm helped us grow. We landed larger accounts, hired project managers, rented a proper office, and moved from surviving quarter to quarter into actually planning a future. But by the 5th year, the cracks were obvious. Bennett still talked like a visionary founder, but his operational follow-through had gotten worse. Client reports were late. Project budgets drifted without explanation. Internal deadlines became suggestions. He missed check-ins, forgot approvals, and blamed his team when things slipped. At first, I covered for him, because that is what partners do. I stayed late to rewrite proposals. I called clients personally when deliverables were delayed. I reassigned work quietly so the team would not panic. I told myself he was overwhelmed or burned out or struggling with the pressure of a growing company. I also knew that founder relationships are complicated. You do not want to treat the person who helped you build the business like an employee who wandered in last month. You give grace. You have private conversations. You try to preserve dignity. That was my mindset when I began scheduling weekly one-on-one meetings with Bennett. Every Thursday at 4, he came into my office, usually carrying a laptop and a bottle of sparkling water, and we talked through the state of operations. I thought those meetings were confidential leadership conversations. They were uncomfortable sometimes, but they were professional. I would bring printed summaries, client complaint logs, margin reports, and project timelines. I would say things like, "Bennett, the Riverton Foods implementation is 19 days behind schedule, and the client has sent 3 written complaints about missed updates." He would sigh, lean back, and say, "Natalie, they are impossible to please. You know that." Then I would point to the contract terms and explain that, impossible or not, we had promised specific milestones. Sometimes he got defensive. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he promised a reset. I documented every meeting afterward, because after years in business, I had learned that memory alone is not enough. I kept dated notes in our secure HR folder, not because I was plotting against him, but because performance problems that affect employees, clients, and money have to be tracked. By January, our situation had become serious. 2 senior consultants had complained that Bennett was changing project scope verbally and then denying it later. One client, a packaging company called Hartwell Paper, threatened to withhold payment after Bennett approved additional analysis without a written change order. Another client complained that Bennett had made commitments the team could not meet, then blamed a junior analyst on a call. I sat with him in my office on January 18 and told him plainly, "This cannot continue. We need documented recovery plans for every delayed account by Monday." He nodded but looked irritated. "You are acting like I am some careless department head," he said. "I am your partner." I told him, "You are my partner, and that is exactly why I am having this conversation directly with you. But being a partner does not mean the company absorbs unlimited operational damage." That sentence later appeared in the attorney's transcript, but without the 10 minutes before it, where I had walked through client names, missed dates, and budget overruns. In the transcript, it looked like I was putting him in his place. In the actual conversation, I was explaining that leadership did not exempt either of us from accountability. February was worse. We lost a renewal from one of our oldest clients after Bennett failed to assign staff to a warehouse audit that had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. He told me he thought the client had postponed. The email trail showed they had not. I remember going home that night furious, but also sad, because I could feel the partnership changing into something I did not recognize. My husband, David, found me standing in the laundry room with my coat still on, staring at nothing. He asked, "Is it Bennett again?" I said, "It is always Bennett now." David did not tell me what to do. He knew better. He just said, "Make sure you are protecting the company and yourself at the same time." That stayed with me. The next morning, I called our outside HR consultant, Marisol Grant, and asked her to review the documentation. Marisol had worked with us for years on hiring policies and employee manuals. She told me to separate my feelings about the partnership from the operational role Bennett held. If he were any other executive, she asked, would you already be considering termination from that role? I did not answer immediately because the truth hurt. Eventually, I said yes. She recommended a formal performance improvement plan, even though Bennett was an owner, because his operations title came with defined responsibilities. We drafted a 90-day plan with measurable requirements, project status updates delivered on schedule, no unapproved budget changes, written change orders for scope increases, documented client communication, and timely staffing assignments. Bennett signed it on February 26, though he did so with a tight smile and a comment that should have warned me. He said, "Paper trails can tell all kinds of stories, Natalie." I thought he meant my documentation. I had no idea he was creating his own. During the improvement period, I continued the weekly meetings. I tried to be careful, clear, and fair. I sent follow-up emails after each meeting summarizing action items. I asked him if he needed resources. I offered to bring in a temporary project coordinator. I suggested shifting 2 accounts away from him for 30 days so he could focus. He rejected almost everything. When I offered help, he treated it like an insult. When I gave deadlines, he called them arbitrary. When I referenced client complaints, he said I was letting clients bully us. But there were occasional moments when the old Bennett appeared. He would sit forward, rub his forehead, and admit, "I know I dropped that one." In those moments, I wanted badly to believe we could fix it. I had built half my adult life beside this person. We had celebrated our first $1 million revenue year with takeout sushi in a conference room because neither of us had time for a real dinner. We had survived a cash flow crisis in year 2 by cutting our own pay. I did not want to be the woman who pushed out her co-founder. I wanted him to step back into leadership. But leadership is not nostalgia. By late April, the improvement plan had failed. Bennett missed 6 of the 12 documented requirements. 2 accounts were over budget because staffing had not been approved on time. A client sent a written complaint accusing him of being dismissive and inconsistent. An internal review showed that he had approved vendor expenses outside our policy. Marisol told me the record supported removing him from the operational leadership role. Our corporate attorney, Leonard Reeves, explained that his ownership interest was separate from his employment role. We could remove him from management and keep the shareholder issues for later negotiation. I called a special board meeting because we had a small advisory board with 2 outside members. I presented the documentation, including the improvement plan results, client emails, financial impact, and staffing complaints. Bennett attended the first part of the meeting and argued that I had been undermining him. He said I had become controlling, that I wanted to turn our company into Natalie's private kingdom, and that I had never respected his style. I stayed as calm as I could, though my hands shook under the table. One outside board member, Denise Caldwell, asked him directly, "Can you explain why the Hartwell change order was never documented?" Bennett said, "My team should have handled that." Denise looked at him for a long second and said, "That was not the question." After Bennett left the room, the board reviewed the record and approved his removal from the operations role. I delivered the decision the next day with Marisol present as a neutral witness. Bennett sat across from me, expressionless. I told him his employment role was terminated effective immediately, that his ownership rights would be addressed separately through counsel, and that he would receive the documents outlining transition steps. He listened without interrupting. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, "You have no idea what you just walked into." I thought he meant a fight over equity. I was wrong. 10 days later, the letter arrived from his attorney. The attorney's name was Graham Ellison, and the first sentence accused me and the company of wrongful termination, discrimination, retaliation, and breach of fiduciary duty. My eyes raced through the pages until I reached the attached transcripts. There were excerpts from at least 9 private meetings between Bennett and me. At first, I was confused. I thought maybe he had taken notes. Then I saw the timestamps, exact words, pauses, my name, his name. The transcript described a chair scraping and a phone vibrating. He had recorded us, not once, not impulsively, For months, I felt physically cold. There is a specific kind of betrayal that comes from realizing someone smiled across a desk from you while collecting ammunition. The first excerpt made me sound like I had targeted him because of personality and identity rather than performance. It quoted me saying, "Your way of leading does not fit where this company is going." In the letter, Graham argued that this showed I had judged Bennett based on who he was, not what he had done. But I remembered that meeting. I had been referring to his refusal to use project management systems, his habit of making verbal promises to clients without documentation, and his insistence that structure would kill the entrepreneurial spirit. The transcript did not include that. Another excerpt quoted me saying, "I need leadership that clients can trust." Graham framed that as a personal attack, but in the full conversation, I had just read aloud a client email stating that they no longer trusted Bennett's delivery dates. A third excerpt included Bennett saying, "It feels like you have been waiting for a reason to push me out," followed by me saying, "The reasons are already in front of us." In isolation, it sounded harsh, almost like an admission. In reality, I had pointed to printed reports on the table. I kept whispering to myself, "This is not what happened." David came home while I was still reading. I handed him the packet. He read silently, jaw tightening. When he finished, he asked, "Did you know he was recording?" I said, "No." My voice sounded strange to me. Small, embarrassed, he asked, "Are these accurate?" I said, "Pieces of them are, but they are missing everything that matters." That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the meetings in my mind, wondering where the recorder had been. His laptop bag, his jacket pocket, his phone face down on my desk. I also felt a creeping fear that maybe no one would believe context. Maybe the damage was already done because the excerpts looked official. They were formatted cleanly, with timestamps and speaker labels. They had the sterile confidence of legal documents. The next morning, I called Priscilla Nakamura, an employment attorney recommended by Leonard. Priscilla's office was in Minneapolis, but she worked with companies across the state. She had a calm voice that made me slow down. I tried to explain everything at once: the partnership, the performance plan, the termination, the recordings, the excerpts. She interrupted gently and said, "Natalie, I need 3 things first. Do not contact Bennett directly. Preserve every document, email, calendar entry, and note, and send me the letter exactly as received." I asked her if the recordings were legal. She said, "We will analyze that, but do not anchor on legality yet. The immediate issue is that they are using selected portions to tell a story. We need the complete recordings." That sentence became the center of the next several weeks. Priscilla explained that a transcript excerpt can be powerful but also misleading. If Bennett intended to rely on recordings, we were entitled to request the full, unedited audio through the legal process. She sent Graham Ellison a formal preservation and production demand, asking for every recording referenced in the letter, every full audio file from which the transcript excerpts were taken, all metadata, all notes relating to the recordings, and the identity of anyone who helped prepare the transcripts. Graham resisted at first. He wrote back that the excerpts were sufficient to support Bennett's claims, and that the full files contained irrelevant confidential business discussion. Priscilla was not impressed. She told me, "He cannot wave a sword," and then refused to show us the blade. Within days, she prepared a response that was measured but firm, explaining that selective excerpts could not be evaluated without full context, and that any litigation would involve discovery of the complete recordings. I spent those days in a state of suspended dread. At work, I tried to behave normally because the staff did not know the details. Bennett's office had been cleared, his accounts reassigned, and everyone could feel the tension. My director of finance, Alma, stepped into my doorway one afternoon and asked if I was all right. I said, "I am handling it." She did not push, but she said, "For what it is worth, the operations team has been calmer this week." That should have comforted me. Instead, I wanted to cry because it reminded me that the business reason had always been real. This was not a personal vendetta. People had been struggling under Bennett's leadership. Clients had been losing patience. Money had been leaking out through preventable errors. Still, the legal letter made me feel like the villain in my own company. About 2 weeks later, Graham produced the recordings under a confidentiality agreement. There were 11 audio files, each labeled by date. Priscilla called me before sending them over. "I want you to prepare yourself," she said. "Listening to yourself being recorded without your knowledge can feel violating. But we need to compare the excerpts to the full conversations carefully." She also recommended hiring a forensic audio examiner to authenticate the files and check for alteration. His name was Dr. Elias Warren, a retired audio engineer who now worked on legal evidence. Priscilla said he could determine whether the files appeared continuous, whether there were signs of splicing, and whether the metadata matched the claimed dates. I approved the expense immediately. I wanted the truth nailed down so firmly that Bennett could not bend it again. The first recording I listened to was from January 18. I sat in Priscilla's conference room with her and a paralegal named June. The audio began with muffled movement, then Bennett saying, "You wanted to talk?" My own voice answered, steady and tired, "Yes. I want to go through Riverton, Hartwell, and the staffing backlog." Hearing myself from months earlier was unsettling. I sounded more patient than I remembered. For nearly 20 minutes, I walked through specific issues. I cited dates, I named emails, I asked Bennett for explanations. He deflected, then minimized, then blamed his team. At one point I said, "I am not asking for perfection. I am asking for accurate status reporting, so clients are not surprised by bad news." That line was nowhere in the transcript Graham had sent. Then came the sentence he had excerpted. "Being a partner does not mean the company absorbs unlimited operational damage." In the full recording, it came after a long discussion of documented mistakes. In the excerpt, it stood alone like a threat. Priscilla paused the audio and looked at me. This is why we needed the full file. We listened for hours over the next few days. The pattern repeated again and again. On February 9th, Graham's transcript quoted me saying, "You cannot keep leading this team the way you have." The full recording showed that I had just discussed two employees who said Bennett gave conflicting instructions and then blamed them for following the wrong one. On February 23, the excerpt quoted me saying, "If you will not adapt, I will have to make changes." The full recording included me offering a project coordinator, revised reporting templates, and a reduced account load. Bennett rejected those options and said, "You are trying to manage me like a child." I responded, "I am trying to protect the company from repeated misses." That response had been cut. On March 14th, the excerpt included Bennett saying, "You have been treating me differently from everyone else," and then my tired sigh. The letter described the sigh like evidence of contempt. The full audio revealed that I then said, "I am treating this role differently because it carries more authority and more consequences. If Alma missed a finance deadline that cost us a client, I would document that too. If I missed a board reporting deadline, I would expect the board to document me." That part was missing too. The most painful recording was from April 11th. By then, I knew the improvement plan was failing. My voice sounded careful, almost overly controlled. Bennett sounded agitated. He accused me of building a file against him. I said, "The file is the work, Bennett. The deadlines either happened or they did not. The client complaints either came in or they did not." He said, "You just do not like the way I operate." I said, "I do not like that Hartwell is $43,000 over budget without an approved change order. I do not like that 2 senior consultants are asking not to be assigned under you. I do not like that Riverton's COO called me because you missed another status meeting. This is not about style." Graham's transcript had included only, "I do not like the way you operate," which was not even my complete sentence. When Priscilla heard that, her expression changed from analytical to sharply focused. She replayed the segment twice. "They converted a denial into an admission," she said. "That is going to matter." Dr. Warren's forensic review took another week. During that time, Priscilla's team built a comparison chart. One column contained Graham's excerpt, the second contained the full transcript, the third identified omitted context, the fourth linked each discussion to supporting documents, such as client emails, budget reports, staffing complaints, and the performance plan. I helped gather everything. I pulled calendar invitations, board minutes, signed acknowledgements, project dashboards, Slack exports, and email threads. It felt like reconstructing a storm from scattered debris. Every document brought back a memory. There was the March email from Hartwell's procurement director saying they could not approve surprise expenses. There was the internal message from a consultant asking whether Bennett had authority to promise a 2-week turnaround. There was the April status dashboard with red flags beside 3 accounts. None of it was glamorous evidence. It was ordinary business paperwork, the kind people complain about until it saves them. At home, I was not doing well. I was short with David. I forgot to eat lunch. I woke up at 3 in the morning thinking about phrases from the transcripts. One night I told David, "Maybe I should have just bought him out earlier. Maybe I let it go too long." David said, "That may be true, but that is different from what he is accusing you of." He was right. I could regret being too patient without accepting a false story about discrimination or retaliation. Still, the emotional damage was real. I felt foolish for trusting private conversations. I felt angry at myself for not noticing. I also felt angry at Bennett in a way I had not before. Performance failure is one thing. Secretly recording a partner while pretending to engage in good faith problem solving is another. It meant that during meetings where I was trying to salvage his role, he may have been thinking about how my words would look in a demand letter. That realization changed my grief into something colder. Dr. Warren finally sent his report to Priscilla. The recordings appeared continuous and unaltered. There were no signs of splicing within the files he reviewed. The metadata was consistent with Bennett recording on the dates claimed. In other words, the full recordings were genuine. At first, that scared me, because it meant the voice on those files was truly mine. Then Priscilla explained why it was good news. If the complete recordings are authentic, then the complete context is authentic too, she said. They cannot claim we fabricated the missing portions. Their own evidence contains the correction. She scheduled a call with Graham Ellison and asked me to attend silently. I sat beside her in her office while she placed the phone on speaker. Graham began with the confident tone of someone used to pressuring a settlement. He said Bennett remained prepared to pursue all claims unless the company offered compensation, a public correction, and a favorable buyout. Priscilla let him finish. Then she said, "We have completed our review of the full recordings your client produced. We have also received a forensic report confirming the recordings appear continuous and unaltered. Your excerpts materially misrepresent the conversations." Graham said, "We disagree with that characterization." Priscilla replied, "Then let us discuss April 11th. She read Graham's excerpt, then read the full passage where I listed Hartwell's budget overrun, employee complaints, and Riverton's missed meeting before saying the issue was not style. There was a pause. She moved to February 23, then March 14, then January 18. With each example, she paired the audio context with documents that supported the business concerns. She did not raise her voice. She did not insult him. She simply stacked fact on fact until the room felt heavier. Graham eventually said he would need to review with his client. Priscilla said, "You should also advise your client about the consequences of relying on selective excerpts after the full recordings have been produced." When the call ended, I realized I had been gripping the edge of the table so hard my fingers ached. I asked, "Do you think he knew how bad the full recordings were for him?" Priscilla said, "Bennett may have believed the excerpts were enough to scare you, or he may have heard only what he wanted to hear. Either way, the full record is not helping him." The next week was quiet, which somehow felt worse than noise. I kept expecting another letter, another accusation, another twist. Instead, Priscilla received a shorter message from Graham asking whether we would consider mediation of all disputes, including Bennett's ownership interest, without pursuing the wrongful termination claim. Priscilla told him we would discuss ownership issues separately, but would not pay settlement value for a claim contradicted by Bennett's own recordings. A few days later, Graham formally withdrew the wrongful termination demand. He did not apologize. Lawyers rarely do in letters like that. He wrote that after further review, Bennett would not pursue employment-related claims at that time. Those last 3 words annoyed me, but Priscilla said the important part was withdrawal. The case he had tried to build had collapsed because the complete recordings showed what had really happened. Bennett's own secret project had backfired. The accountability did not end there. Our board reviewed the matter and authorized Leonard to begin negotiations for Bennett's ownership exit. The recordings had revealed more than selective legal strategy. They also captured Bennett admitting he had delayed certain client updates because he did not want more noise before board meetings. They captured him acknowledging that he had approved extra vendor work without written authorization. Those admissions strengthened the company's position in the buyout discussions. Bennett eventually agreed to sell his shares back under a structured payment plan at a valuation adjusted for documented operational losses and pending client credits. It was not the dramatic courtroom ending people imagine in stories, but it was real accountability. He lost his leadership role, his legal leverage, and his ownership stake on terms far less favorable than he expected. I did not celebrate when the final agreement was signed. I sat in my car afterward and cried for about 5 minutes. Not because I wanted him back, but because the ending made the whole thing undeniable. The partnership was over. The person I had once trusted with payroll, strategy, client relationships, and my own doubts had sat across from me for months creating evidence to use against me. Even though I won the legal fight, there was no clean victory in that realization. Running the company after Bennett left was both easier and harder. Operationally, things improved within weeks. Alma helped me appoint an interim operations director named Priya Deshmukh, who was organized in a way that made everyone breathe easier. Priya did not make grand speeches. She built dashboards, clarified responsibilities, and asked clients direct questions. Hartwell stayed with us after we issued a credit and assigned a new project lead. Riverton renewed for a smaller scope, which I considered a mercy. The staff began speaking more openly. One consultant told me, I did not realize how much time we spent managing around Bennett until we stopped. That comment hurt, because as CEO I should have acted sooner. I had mistaken loyalty for patience and patience for fairness. Those are not always the same thing. Personally, I changed. I no longer held sensitive performance conversations alone if the stakes were high. That was the first policy I implemented, and I did it company-wide. Any significant performance discussion involving executives, senior managers, or potential termination now includes a neutral third party, usually HR or outside counsel depending on the issue. We also document the agenda before the meeting and the summary afterward. Minnesota law may allow certain recordings under certain circumstances, but legality was not my only concern. Trust, context, and process mattered too. I could not control whether someone tried to record me, but I could control whether a complete, neutral record existed. I also trained our managers on how easily words can be twisted when separated from the facts around them. I told them, do not rely on tone. Do not rely on memory. Say the business issue clearly, tie it to evidence, and follow up in writing. Some people thought that sounded stiff. I understood. No one starts a company dreaming of formal performance documentation. But I had learned that a careful record is not a lack of compassion. Sometimes it is the only thing standing between the truth and a convincing lie. Months later, I ran into Bennett at a charity breakfast downtown. I did not know he would be there. He was standing near the coffee station talking to a commercial banker we both knew. When he saw me, his face tightened. For a second, I considered turning around. Instead, I poured coffee and nodded politely. He stepped closer and said, quietly enough that no one else could hear, "You really went all the way with it." I looked at him and said, "You recorded me for months, Bennett." He looked away first. Then he said, "I was protecting myself." I said, "No, you were preparing to misrepresent me." He did not answer. There was a time when I would have filled that silence, softened the moment, tried to rescue us both from discomfort. I did not do that anymore. I walked away with my coffee. That brief exchange gave me more closure than the legal letters did. He still saw himself as the person forced into defense. I saw the full record. The truth was not that I had been perfect. I had been slow to confront him. I had hoped charm would become accountability. I had let our history delay decisions that affected other employees. But the truth was also not what he tried to sell through those excerpts. I did not terminate him because of bias, retaliation, or personal dislike. I terminated his operational role because he missed deadlines, damaged client trust, exceeded budgets, ignored process, blamed staff, and failed a documented improvement plan. The complete recordings proved that because, despite his intentions, I had been saying it clearly all along. The experience taught me something uncomfortable about being a woman in leadership, too. I had spent years trying to be firm without being labeled cold, patient without being seen as weak, direct without being called hostile. Bennett's excerpts played into every fear I had about how a woman's authority can be reframed. My calm statements became supposedly controlling. My documentation became supposedly strategic cruelty. My refusal to keep absorbing damage became supposedly personal animus. Listening to the full recordings helped me reclaim my own voice. I heard a woman trying very hard to be fair under pressure. I heard frustration, yes, but I also heard evidence, options, warnings, and restraint. That mattered. Sometimes the record is not only for court, sometimes it is for you, so you can remember who you were when someone else tries to rewrite you. Today, the company is smaller than it might have been if Bennett and I had separated earlier, but it is healthier. Priya became permanent COO. We rebuilt client confidence slowly. We revised our partnership agreements, executive review policies, and document retention rules. We added a clause requiring disclosure of recordings in certain internal proceedings and reminding everyone that company confidential information cannot be captured or shared casually. We also created a leadership accountability process that applies to founders, executives, and managers alike. Nobody gets to hide behind title or history. That includes me. Every quarter, I sit with the board and review my own goals in writing. It is humbling, but it is clean. Priscilla told me after everything resolved that secretly recorded conversations can cut both ways. People imagine recordings as traps, but complete recordings are often less obedient than the person making them expects. They preserve the inconvenient parts too, the warnings, the context, the documents being discussed, the offers of help, the admissions, the pauses after hard questions. Bennett thought he was building a case against me. What he actually built was an audio archive of me doing my job. If you have ever had someone take your words and twist them into something almost unrecognizable, You know how disorienting it feels, and if you have ever been responsible for making a hard decision about someone you once trusted, you know there is no painless way through it. I still believe in candid conversations. I still believe people deserve direct feedback and a chance to improve, but I no longer confuse privacy with protection, and I no longer assume that history will make someone fair. If you were in my position, would you have kept trying to save the partnership as long as I did, or would you have removed Bennett sooner once the documentation was clear? Share what you would have done, because I know many people have faced some version of this, where loyalty, leadership, and self-protection collide. Thank you for listening to my story. Subscribe for more stories about workplace betrayal, difficult accountability, and the moments when the truth finally has enough evidence to stand on its own. I hope you take care of yourself, protect your work, and never let someone else's edited version become the only version people hear.